guys! Today we'll be recapping a story called Princess Wars. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot. Enjoy! The tale unfolds with the destiny of a princess defined by her beauty, status, and wealth, destined to wed a prince and thwart the schemes of a wicked witch. A young girl seeking directions to the palaces reveal her intention to partake in the prince's trial. Her attire, reminiscent of a pea, aligns with the card she randomly drew today. Formerly an ordinary employee, the girl succumbed to overwork, only to awaken in the realm of the dead, greeted by a cat in boots. Congratulating her on being chosen for the princess game, the cat elucidates the circumstances of her demise, a fatal cardiac arrest. Accepting her fate, she learned the rules of the game, selecting one of 7 cards, each promising princesshood. She must win the prince's heart within 3 years to gain 50 years of life and a prize of 10 million. Without hesitation, she chose the Princess P card, endowed with the ability to foresee impending danger. 50 years to live and 10 million? It's not a bad prize. After 10 seconds, Han finds herself transported into the world of the princess game. Drenched by rain, Han stumbles upon a palace, recalling the storyline dictating that to marry the prince, she must enter one. Upon knocking, a maid welcomes her, soon realizing Han's true identity as Princess P within the game. Guided further, Han passes a portrait of Prince Vincent, the kingdom's sole prince. The maid extols the prince's virtues, describing him as the epitome of gentleness and attractiveness, suggesting immense fortune awaits his future bride. Han acknowledges his appearance, but confesses her days of swooning over handsome men have passed. Her sole aim is to capture the prince's heart and secure the promised reward. Additionally, the maid reveals the prince's ailing health and his desire to abdicate the throne swiftly, prompting the selection of potential princesses from around the globe. Entering the room, Han finds herself among numerous contenders vying for the prince's affection. Approaching a maid, she receives a number, 40. This signifies she must defeat at least 39 princesses to win the heart of the prince. The Empire of the Golden Rose reigns as the wealthiest in the East, while the Western kingdoms seek to bolster their power through strategic marriages. The princess test serves as their method to find a suitable match for the prince, with success granting the title of official candidate for royal consort. Meanwhile, instructed to wait in the hall, she observes the abundance of princesses. With confidence, she declares these princesses are merely supporting characters, enriching the storyline, while she herself is destined to pass the test. Han Moli's confidence is on another level. Suddenly, a striking woman in an elegant gown with impeccable poise captures P's attention. She is Princess Vivienne of Kingdom Gordon. However, when gossip about her and Han circulates, Vivienne's reaction is far from enthusiastic. Before long, Prince Vincent and Princess Helen make their entrance into the hall. Han observes that the prince exceeds the allure of his portrait. Prince Vincent graciously welcomes everyone, expressing gratitude for their attendance. I totally agree with you, Han Moli. Prince Vincent proceeds to introduce Princess Helen to the other princesses he encountered in the forest. Despite Helen's inability to speak, she proves herself worthy of the title through her actions. The prince expresses his belief in forming meaningful connections with all the princesses, acknowledging Helen as a potential candidate for royal consort. Upon this revelation, Han recognizes Helen as the Swan Princess and a fellow player in the game. Sensing trouble, her fingers grow hot, signaling the onset of danger, a manifestation of the magical ability granted by her card. Suddenly, Han is forcefully pushed, finding herself kneeling before the prince, a sword pointed at her by the royal guard. She pleads for mercy, insisting she meant no disrespect. Vivienne intercedes, vouching for Han's innocence, yet subtly humiliates her by remarking on her apparent discomfort walking on the marble floor. At this moment, Han realizes Vivienne is the one who pushed her. Han Moli defends herself, stressing her lack of disrespect towards the prince. Despite the guard's escalating anger, the prince steps in, quelling further aggression. Han highlights the immorality of executing a princess, given the global summons for choosing a consort. She explains that kneeling symbolizes utmost respect. Vincent, gently lifting Han Moli's chin, urges her to seize the consort selection opportunity for diplomatic ties. He acknowledges the guard's duty to uphold the law. Interrupting, Helen assures the prince of Han Moli's innocence, suggesting her actions were accidental and born out of admiration. Charmed, the prince agrees with Helen's plea, smiling. Afterward, Prince Vincent returns to his palace. Meanwhile, Han Moli thanks Helen for intervening and saving her from the royal guard. Thank God they spared her life. She doesn't deserve that, and she isn't even to blame. Upon returning to his office, the prince's guard echoes Vivian's caution, but Vincent dismisses it, citing a lack of understanding of women's hearts. Meanwhile, the princesses settle into their rooms, arranging their staff according to their assigned numbers. Han strategically places P's staff under everyone's mattress for added security. Later, they're invited to dine with the prince. During dinner, Han wonders about Vivian's persistent attention. As Vivian finishes her meal and wanders off, Han decides to follow, curious why she's not returning to the palace dormitory. Seriously, what's wrong with her? Han Moli sees Vivian instructing a maid to remove all the peas from under the beds except hers. Surprised by this, Han wonders how Vivian is aware of the story of the peas and speculates whether she has seen the original fairy tale before. Vivian's sole focus is winning the test. However, Han Moli unexpectedly knocks on the wall, infuriating Vivian. To diffuse the tension, Han Moli casually emerges as if nothing had occurred and questions why Vivian is alone in the hallway. Upon learning of Han Moli's presence, the maid requests her to accompany Vivian. Despite smiling, Han Moli mischievously informs Vivian that they are heading in the wrong direction. In response, Vivian issues a menacing threat, warning that any misstep could offend the royal family, resulting in Han Moli's fall. After returning to their bedroom, Han Moli discovers that there are no peas under their bed. Suspecting Vivian's involvement, she realizes that Vivian is responsible for the missing peas. Struggling to inform the Royal Highness about the situation, Han Moli is interrupted by the royal guard, who accuses her of stealing the peas. Refuting the accusation, she insists it wasn't her and asserts that someone else must be behind the theft. She expresses her urgency to report the true culprit responsible for all the missing peas. I think you're the one who's up to no good, sir. You're always accusing Han Moli. As dawn breaks, the palace maid greets the princesses. Han Moli tells the maid she slept comfortably, but Vivian disagrees, claiming something pressed against her during the night. When questioned further by the maid, Vivian insinuates discomfort. Feeling triumphant, Vivian's satisfaction is short-lived as the maid suddenly announces the test's conclusion, leaving the princesses shocked. Not too fast, Vivian. Don't be overly confident this time. The prince arrives and informs him that the test began a while ago. He explains that peas were placed under their mattresses to make them uncomfortable, but he deemed it unfair and ordered the maid to replace them with new ones. He emphasizes that the purpose is to uncover the cheater in the game. Upon receiving news of a princess cheating and falsely claiming discomfort that morning, it becomes evident that it was none other than Vivian. The night before the confrontation with Vivian, Han Moli confides in Vincent, revealing she overheard Vivian and the maid's conversation. She notes that, unlike Vivian, the other princesses have no peas under their mattresses. Vincent acknowledges Han's straightforwardness and perceptiveness, suggesting her qualities are suited for a guard. Unable to immediately accuse Vivian, he seeks evidence. Han proposes removing all the peas from the mattresses, reasoning that anyone uncomfortable in the morning must have cheated. Vincent orders the royal guard to have all the mattresses changed by the maid. He acknowledges Han's confidence in her accusations towards Vivian, despite Vivian's status as the princess of Gordon's kingdom. Han asserts her certainty and willingness to take responsibility if wrong. Impressed by Han's resolve, Vincent praises her confidence, dubbing her his special princess. He emphasizes the seriousness of the situation and expresses hope for her success in the exam. Han's stepping up in the game! Way to go! Later that morning, the confrontation unfolds, and the royal guard demands Vivian be taken. Vivian vehemently denies all accusations, leading Han Moli to realize she won't admit to wrongdoing obediently. In a decisive move, Han Moli grasps the maid's hand, the one who conversed with Vivian, and politely requests her to be a witness to Vivian's cheating. Vivian's fury towards Han Moli intensifies at the scene. Girl, you did this to yourself! Shock sweeps through the room as the maid confesses to taking the peas. Vincent demands Vivian confess to her wrongdoing, but Vivian insists the servant hasn't revealed who ordered her to do so. When Vivian questions the maid, she claims sole responsibility. Vivian demands the maid be dragged out of the palace and beheaded. However, Han Moli remains skeptical of the maid's confession, sensing that something isn't right. Vivian redirects the situation, highlighting Han Moli's mistake. The guard moves to restrain Han Moli, per the prince's order, but Vincent recalls his conversation with her and instructs the guards to release her. Though Han Moli will still face consequences for her reckless accusations, Vincent decides she will serve as a servant in the palace. To his surprise, Han Moli accepts the punishment positively, impressing him with her response and earning her status as an intriguing princess. And it looks like he will finally do some changes in his garden. Instead of a rose, it's a cactus. Is this a hint? I forgot! Vivian is the thorn among all roses! After the ordeal, Vivian is finally acknowledged as a chosen princess, successfully passing the test. She will remain at the palace as a candidate to become a prince consort. As the head maid reminds Han of her duties despite her status as a princess, Han reflects on her past corporate work. However, Princess Helen intervenes, expressing her desire for Han to serve as her personal maid, a request the head maid approves. Later, Helen leads Han to a room designated for her personal maid. Impressed by the accommodations, Han questions Helen's kindness towards her. Helen explains that Han is unlike the others and asks to hear her story. However, Han decides to share a different narrative, cautious about revealing too much. She also inquires about how Helen met the prince. As time goes by, Han assumes her role as Helen's personal maid. While she's washing clothes, someone insists she doesn't need to do it, but Han continues. However, she's abruptly pushed by one of Vivian's servants who takes silk intended for Vivian. Han chooses not to confront the situation, instead reflecting on Vivian's bullying behavior towards Helen, despite both being candidates for the royal consort. The mystery surrounding Helen's true identity still gnaws at Han's mind. Once she finishes laundry, Han waits for Helen in the garden maze. She's startled when she witnesses someone falling from a tree, a man with white hair clutching gardener's scissors. Despite the scary stories, I find him hot. Don't you guys think so? The man informs Han that Helen is next to the fountain, a location unfamiliar to her. Though uncertain, she asks for directions, recalling a story the maids had discussed. Despite her lack of warning from the P's birthmark, she feels at ease. Nevertheless, the man insists she follow him to Helen's whereabouts. He's really handsome. As they head towards Helen's location, Han notices a golden rose. When she touches it, she's pricked before she can warn herself. She observes the man becoming talkative when discussing flowers, contemplating befriending him to advance in the game. Realizing she's late to meet Helen, she hurries to the fountain, finding Helen already there. Helen informs her that Vivian is also present and demands an apology. Han reluctantly complies, knowing Vivian holds sway this time. When Vivian arrives, tea and cookies are offered. Disparaging the cookies as servants' food, Vivian tosses one at Han. Unfazed, Han tastes it, revealing it's made from the Golden Rose Empire's national flower. She rebukes Vivian for disrespecting the cookie and its significance. A royal consort candidate with no class at all. Han's remark infuriates Vivian, prompting her to snatch back the cookies and eat them herself. She vows to retaliate against Han for her words, promising to humiliate her in return. Are you out of your mind? Han didn't do anything wrong. After a while, the prince arrives at the garden and is surprised by the lively atmosphere. He then inquires what it's all about. During the conflict, they are approached by the prince, who joins them at the table with the princesses. Princess Helen expresses concern for the prince, insisting that he shouldn't fret over trivial matters. Despite the windy weather, the prince enters the garden to see Helen, whom he hasn't been able to visit in the past few days. However, Vivian interprets his actions differently, believing that his attention being solely on Helen indicates his lack of happiness to see her. Geez, you're not that special, Vivian. As they sit at the table, the prince turns to Vivian, declaring that the jewel she received already signifies his affection towards her. He notices Han Moli's presence, realizing she's always nearby whenever something happens. During their conversation, a royal guard interrupts as commanded by the prince. Vincent then reveals that the emperor was pleased when Vivian and Helen entered the palace. He presents 2 gems, one for each princess, much to Vivian's delight. He then announces a royal banquet in 10 days where he will choose his bride from among the princesses. Excited, Vivian then asks for his company in choosing expensive dresses, but he suddenly coughs, causing concern from the princesses. It's really pointless, Vivian. No one cares about what you wear when you can't even buy good manners. He assures them and orders the guard to take the necklaces to the princesses' chambers. Then he instructs Han Moli to escort him to the palace. On the way, Han Moli realizes that being alone with the prince isn't as simple as she thought. She considers seducing him to win the game and claim the prize money, but the prince's previous interactions with her complicate matters. Walking through the alley, the prince senses Han Moli's tension and asks if she's afraid of him. In a surprising mood, she lifts him like a princess, leaving him stunned and questioning her true identity. Upon reaching the palace, Han Moli is scolded by the royal court for carrying the prince, deemed inappropriate for a noble lady. However, the prince defends her, citing his headache and advising the guard to lower his voice. Han Moli feels upset by the guard's remarks about her not looking like a princess. However, determined to succeed in her current life, she resolves to do whatever it takes to win. In her room, Vivian seethes with outrage over the earlier events and shifts blame onto her maid for not informing her about the cookie's filling being made from an imperial flour. When the maid reveals that everyone knew about the cookie's origin, Vivian concludes that Han is just another character. It dawns on her that she's taken on the role of Pea Princess. Is she also a player in this game? No wonder she's always angry towards Han. Upon returning to Helen's chamber, Han Moley finds Helen inquiring about the prince's well-being, to which Han responds affirmatively, except for the flirt talk. Helen then advises Han to be more careful with Vivian, because after all, she is her opponent in the competition. Despite Helen's advice, Han decides that the earlier incident will prompt her to avoid conflicts and behave like a normal person, thus steering clear of trouble. She smiles at Helen, promising to exhibit her best behavior from then on. As time progresses, dresses for the banquet are tailored, and Helen can choose one from the selection. On Han's day off, she reluctantly receives a package from a kneeling servant, apprehensive about its contents for the garden. Determined, she decides to deliver it herself. Upon finding the gardener, Han hands over the package, which he identifies as fertilizer. Despite rumors circulating about him, Han aids the gardener, recalling a recent encounter with him and understanding his solitary demeanor. Guys, let's admit it, we all love gardening, don't we? Meanwhile, at the palace, the royal guard informs the prince that the dresser has been dispatched, following the prince's instructions for Helen to choose the first dress. Inquiring about Han Moley's whereabouts, the guard reveals she's gardening, causing the prince to spill his tea in surprise. In the fitting room, Helen carefully selects a dress for the upcoming banquet. Once she decides, the tailor takes measurements to ensure the dress fits her figure perfectly. There were indeed beautiful and expensive dresses, and I'm sure she'll look perfect at the banquet. After an hour, Vivian storms into the tailor shop, fuming that she didn't get the first choice. She shoves the tailor aside and snatches the dress Helen has chosen earlier. Meanwhile, upon returning to her chamber, Helen retrieves a dress she has selected for Han Moley. When Han tries it on, it fits her beautifully, just as Helen had anticipated. The dress is exquisite and complements Han perfectly. In gratitude for Helen's kindness, Han presents her with a specially cultivated lily known for its fragrance, intended for noble women. Moved by Han's gesture, Helen tears up, expressing how much she hasn't had a good friend in a long time. Han inquires about the dress Helen chose earlier that day, and Helen reveals she stowed it away in the closet. What does she mean by that? However, the scheming Vivian has already snatched the dress for herself. Delighted, she revels in the thought of wearing the most exquisite dress at the banquet. Such a shame that your attitude doesn't match with the beautiful dress. Helen revealed that Vivian took her dress, and the tailor said that Helen could pick out another one for the banquet. However, the dress that the tailor gave to her was not as beautiful as the first dress she originally picked. Han Moley couldn't believe it, since the tailor has high respect for Helen. She also thinks that Vivian threatened the tailor. As suspected, that girl was up to no good. Helen pinches Han and urges her not to worry about her, reassuring her that she'll wear the dress provided by the tailor. Despite Helen's attempt to alleviate her concerns, Han remains troubled, understanding the significance of the royal banquet as an opportunity for nobility. She turns to Helen and shares an idea. Despite maintaining her guard, Han decides to assist Helen with her attire for the royal banquet. Finally, the day arrives. The royal banquet at the palace commences. The emperor extends invitations to the aristocracy, and the prince will soon announce the two candidates for the royal consort. Outside the palace, Han Moley, wary but determined, rushes to the garden with a bouquet of blue lilies. Finding the garden deserted, she lifts her dress, ready for the task ahead. A man appears in the corner and offers to help her, but she politely rejects him. When he asks if she knows him, she replies that she doesn't. Despite her refusal to accept his offer, he advises her on a better route she could take. This guy is pretty handsome too, but he's quite fishy. At the banquet, the prince finally introduces Vivian and Helen as his lovely candidates for the royal consort. Everyone is amazed when Vivian shows up in her beautiful dress, but their attention is quickly drawn to Helen. Meanwhile, Vivian isn't pleased as she glances at Helen. Helen arrives in a stunning blue dress surrounded by blue lilies, exuding elegance. Han Moley was truly a lifesaver. On the other hand, the prince appreciates everyone's reactions to his two candidates. However, his attention is drawn to the maid, Han Moley. It's too early to assume, but does this mean he developed feelings for her? The day of the official coronation of the two candidates has come. The Emperor and Prince Vincent stood in front of everyone in the palace while the two princesses knelt before them, ready to be crowned. The crowning had a successful turn while the people celebrated the two princesses in awe of their beauty and elegance, befitting to be the future empress. Meanwhile, as the celebration partakes, Han feels a burning pain from her birthmark that begins to escalate her flight and fight response. On the other hand, the Emperor surprises the prince with his brother, Duke Owen, who is the prince's uncle. They caught up with each other while the Emperor asked for his brother's opinion about the candidates. Surprisingly, what caught Duke Owen's eyes weren't the princesses, but Han, who is currently Helen's lady-in-waiting. The prince felt uneasy about it and instantly rejected his uncle's opinion, despite it being a supposed joke. The orchestra began playing, indicating the start of the waltz. The people wondered who will be the first chosen lady to dance with the prince, as it indicates greater favor of winning. Nonetheless, the Emperor favors Helen more for her show of gratitude by wearing the gem they gave her, and how gentle and generous she is as a person. Being understanding as he is, Vincent asks for Helen's hand to be his first dance. Vivian's face turned sour and hatred was painted on it. Girl, have some sportsmanship and be happy for Helen for once. The waltz began while the prince sought for Helen's comfort, but as soon as the prince grasped her into his arms, Helen fainted. This shocked everyone and worried the prince entirely. It was a good chance to create memories with the prince, though. Will she be okay? The prince commanded the royal doctor to tend to Helen, but while waiting, Han checked for her breathing even when she still felt her birthmark burning. It kept her on edge until she noticed the instant whip of a sword towards the prince. She immediately stopped the assassination of the prince, but unfortunately, the assassin, who was an underling of the witch, poisoned himself to escape interrogation. This dismayed everyone and left the people on haywire. What a waste! The witch knows her schemes too well. It's so frustrating. The prince immediately hushed the people with his eloquence, and the celebration continued swiftly with his words of assurance. Helen was brought to the royal clinic, and Han is about to tend to her when a hand holds hers. It was the prince who, in front of the masses, asked Han to be his first dance. Everyone is in disbelief to see the prince ask a low-class maiden instead of Vivian after Helen's incident. Moreover, Han, who was dumbfounded, heard the people as they watched her with hawk eyes, and despite her declining, the prince did not allow it. She then confessed how bad she dances, but the prince guided her anyway. With a step of her heel, the prince finally got to hear her confession. In disbelief that she subdued an enemy with her lack of coordination. At the back, Owen and the Emperor were discussing how the prince would rule the Empire in the future. While dancing with the prince, Han breaks her silence and asks what he would do about what has happened. She looked for answers to her queries about Helen and the assassin, but instead, the prince asked her to check on him. He explained why he continued the celebration despite his near death and spoke about the witch's curse of calamity, fear, and darkness that tricked her to believe his words. Almost gullible, Han worries about the information she gathered. But then, the prince saw her expression and let out a small burst of laughter. She queried his reaction, and he told her that gullibility will only put her in danger at the palace grounds. His expression turned to worry when saying this. As if on cue, the music stopped, indicating the finale of the first waltz. When suddenly, someone caught the prince's eyes. It was Vivian, who scandalously rejected a noble to dance with her and poured wine onto his face. With disbelief, everyone saw her true ugly colors when she saw the prince choose Han a while back. You probably deserve the hate for that attitude. Minutes later, the cat who welcomed Han into the game spoke into her mind and announced the ending of the novice level of the game and the escalation of the difficulty in the next rounds. This leads Han to the point of being more crucial and serious to win the crown. Love, as she defined it, was everything about her. Vivian dreamed about her past life again. How she hated her lover for cheating on her without knowing it was because of how she treated him as a cheap and discriminated person. Before she died, she witnessed her lover cheating with a gentle and kind girl. On the stairs, she asked him scandalously why he was able to cheat on her when she was the perfect girl. And when she finally tried to grab the girl who was behind him, she was pushed down the stairs, causing her death. The dream caused greater hatred towards her lover and motivated her to win the game so she could go back and beat the hell out of him. Meanwhile, Helen has not yet woken up, and Han was on her side tending to the resting princess when Captain Anthony went to deliver a gift from the prince to Helen. After a few minutes of thinking about Helen's condition, Han decided to find Zane to somehow solve the probable connection of Helen's condition to the witch. As soon as she arrived at the palace garden, she looked for Zane and immediately asked him about the witch. At first, he was reluctant about her asking him as nobody actually believes his words. But as their conversation went, another conversation was heard from the other side of the garden. Zane hushed Han and both peeked through the bushes. They saw Captain Anthony with Vivian. "What alchemy is this, and what are you plotting again, Vivian?" Captain Anthony asked her to keep it short as the prince was waiting for him. Yet Vivian spoke discriminatively of him, telling Anthony that it wasn't his pick to decide how long she needed his assistance. Eavesdropping from the secret conversation between the captain and Vivian, Han and Zane learned that Vivian wanted to gain the favor of the prince again after her defeat at the banquet. However, the captain deems himself loyal to His Highness and expresses his apology for not being of use to her. Scheming as always, Vivian plotted something that Han had never seen before. She intentionally dropped her golden orb in front of the captain and asked him to pick it up for her. The second he held the orb, he asked for Vivian's command. Witnessing such manipulative magic, Han realizes that Vivian came from the Frog Prince story and forced herself to invade a different story. Finally having an idea about magic and Vivian's witchcraft, Zane informed her that more knowledge about witches may be gathered from the royal library, which she failed to enter due to her low-class status. When she was about to give up, Duke Owen introduced a secret passage to the library, only to be entered at night so as to avoid being arrested by the guards. She politely followed the Duke behind the palace walls. Owen tried to crawl into some of the bushes with her, leaving his butler dumbfounded by such vulgar actions. This somehow built trust between the two of them. "Mind you, sir, the maiden is quite young to be your love interest." Meanwhile, the prince discusses Helen's connection to the witch with the captain who was manipulated by Vivian. Without wasting any chances, Vivian then intervened and weighed on the discussion to sabotage Helen again. The story continues with Duke Owen and Han sticking their heads into the bushes to check the secret passage he spoke about. His butler, who was looking for him for some time now, saw their positions and was left wondering what was happening. Later on, he called out his master and the Duke had to bid Han farewell. He handed her his personal seal so she could write him a letter if she needed his help in the palace. Confused about the Duke's kind treatment to a nobody like her, she asked him and he answered her ambiguously about his loneliness. Nonetheless, Han felt kindness and gratitude towards the Duke for being like her safety net and thanked him before going back to Helen. When she arrived, Helen had woken up, and after the maids had left the room, Helen cried in Han's arms. She confessed about her fear of men's touch as she was physically abused and beaten in her past life. It pained Han to see her friend hurting, so she comforted her until Captain Anthony barged in with other guards to announce the investigation of Helen's involvement in the assassination. Han was about to defend her, but Helen stopped her and asked her to keep it a secret. Hence, Helen is currently locked inside her room until the investigation clears. Han's bad feeling about Vivian grew worse after knowing how Vivian desperately wants to seize the moment to oust Helen completely. After that day, Vivian is the only princess candidate to accompany the prince and take all the favor, while Helen waits for the prince to release her from suspicion. However, during the night, Han sneaks into the secret passage and arrives at the library. But when she turned her lamp on, she saw the cat again. This time, in the library, the cat smiled slyly and pushed the books to make a sound which put her on edge. She then realized that the cat was the one who made her enter the game. With one push, the books crashed, alarming the two men who promptly went to arrest her. Almost nearing death, she saw the prince. The prince looked at her with dismay and stopped the men from killing her, as if he wanted to kill her himself. He then let them leave the library and turned his attention to Han. Slowly but menacingly, he interrogated her, pushing her towards one of the bookshelves. "Geez, she's a great help to you. Don't kill her, man." It was the end of her from the moment she felt her birthmark burn red. So her instincts told her to run for her life, but as much as she wanted to leave, the prince grabbed her hand and pinned her on the table, choking her. Before the prince could ever kill her, she asked for another chance. A flashback of her past life memories came rushing through. She wanted a better life than that little suffocating life she had. She screamed with all her might that the witch was in the palace. Immediately, the prince removed his hand from her and let her explain. This time, she explained why the prince was acting like that, including her in the investigation as she was one of the people in that banquet. He was not even surprised how smart Han is. However, Han told him that he was looking in the wrong direction in finding the witch. Instead of outside, the witch is among the people inside the palace. She then convinced the prince to give her another chance, as she saw the witch's magic but has no evidence to prove the person among the masses of their witchcraft. This was the only way she could stop the prince from killing her and the way she could gain more access to the palace. 10 days. The prince makes a deal with Han that within 10 days from tomorrow, she has to find evidence that the witch is in the palace, or he will kill her. At first, Han felt relieved for the life spared, but at the same time, 10 days is a bit short to plan out her moves. So she tried to convince the prince to give her a month, but the prince was stern enough with 10 days. She haggled more days, but eventually was not permitted beyond that by the prince and was only asked to help him wear his cloak. Their faces are only inches apart from each other when the prince finalized his deal. Nevertheless, she was given access to the library and to the other palace grounds. Before leaving, she looked at the prince. In her mind, he was not the soft-spoken, gentle prince to the people, but a cold, venomous person ready to strike instantly. Later that night, she read about witches. Witches are found conquering the world and causing famine, drought, and calamities to the people. Not until the 52nd year of the Empire when Emperor William Roscarte led forces to win over the witches. The lives of the people in the continent lit up after his win and now during his reign, but despite this, some witches are still lurking around the Empire. After gaining all that information, she begins to analyze Vivian's type of witchcraft. She wonders what type of witch she is and the rest of the princesses are, including herself. On the other hand, one guard went to the prince to tell him that Vivian wanted to rendezvous under the moonlight with him, but he refused, telling the guard he was tired and provided the cloak to Vivian instead. Everyone in the palace is busy packing all the stuff needed by the prince and Princess Vivian. Han asked one of the maids about the commotion and was informed that the prince is going on a 3-day sea trip with Princess Vivian 3 days from today. Like her blood drained down her body, she cursed him in her mind for dragging her investigation of the witch longer than she only had. She began to think of an idea, also considering her new friend Helen. So she decided to enter Helen's room through the window, which startled Helen a little. Helen let out a small laugh for Han's clever ways when she dropped letters on the floor. Helen shared about the letters her brother sent her about their kingdom's drought. Her brother is asking for her help to let the emperor aid their little kingdom from the calamity. However, this is impossible in her state right now. Han, who is eager to help her, tries to convince the prince to allow her to come with them on the 3-day trip so she can complete her investigation. She was even astonished by the sharpness of the prince's mind when he assumed that she was trying to find evidence against Vivian as the witch. Luckily, she convinced the prince to let her come along with Helen. Delighted with such news, she immediately went for the door to leave, but was instantly seized by the prince's words. She was commanded to change the flowers in his room despite having maids for the job. On the flip side, at the bay of a beach, a red-haired princess shows up with a boy behind her. She enjoyed the breeze of the ocean, ready to seize her opportunity in 3 days' time. 3 days have passed and the trip has begun. Although Princess Helen was given the special day out from investigation, she was not treated equally with Princess Vivian. But this did not stop Han from letting Helen ask the prince about her plea and decided to strike on the 2nd day. As a result, they failed to meet the prince because Vivian, in her favor, is having tea with the prince. Even on the 3rd day, Helen had no luck when the guard told her the prince is with Vivian's sea sighting. This enraged Han, but she wasn't able to do anything other than to stay inside Helen's room with her. A few minutes later, when Vivian assumed her place beside the prince, on the basis of the prince giving her extravagant gifts and spending most time with her, a Van der Kide ship approaches. The guards rushed to protect the prince and the guests when the lady with the red long hair stepped out of the Van der Kide ship and gracefully entered the prince's ship. The prince commanded his guards to let down their guard and welcomed Princess Charlotte, who he was supposed to meet after the trip. With the turn of events, the prince gathered all the princesses for dinner. He then formally introduced Charlotte, who, with the Sea Orchid Kingdom, will form an alliance with the Empire, to his 2 lovely princess candidates. Dinner then begins, and conversation has started when Princess Charlotte flirts with the prince in front of Vivian and Helen. This action provoked Vivian to a great level, and was even more provoked when Charlotte almost kissed the prince. Aside from Vivian's problem, Helen wanted to take an opportunity tonight to tell the prince of her kingdom's situation, but she was cut when Charlotte clung to the prince's arms, complaining about a bug in her food. Unfortunately, Charlotte's food fell on the floor, so the prince asked one of the butlers to clean the food for Charlotte. But right on time, Han volunteered to do it for Charlotte, as she would feel more at ease with a female servant catering her. After which, Han tries to open a chance for Helen by letting Charlotte out of the room. The prince perhaps understood her plan and went with it, forcing Charlotte out to change into a new dress. "You're too kind, please." From there, Helen seized her opportunity, and after dinner, Han immediately asked for an update regarding the matter. Helen was offered by the prince to help her in talking with the emperor regarding their kingdom, and this somehow brought hope. A few minutes later, Vivian came out of nowhere, convincing Helen to join forces in ousting Charlotte before she could even gain favor from the prince. The plan was to kill Charlotte, and eventually, Helen refused to do so. Vivian tries to brainwash her into the plan, but only ends up having Helen feel bad and rest for the night, while the prince holds a small celebration on the ship to welcome Charlotte. Charlotte sang soulfully and magnificently, enthralling the people on the ship, but not Vivian. She provoked Vivian every chance she could get until Helen showed up. Actually, it was Han who showed up in Helen's clothes. She presented to everyone her sword dance, almost trying to threaten the prince's life into oblivion as she pointed her sword at the prince. She continued her moves gracefully, letting the viewers blush for the dance's beauty. When she whipped her sword and directed it even closer to the prince's face, the guards panicked at her actions until she tricked them into believing she transformed the sword into a beautiful gold rose and offered it to the prince as a congratulatory gift for the Empire's new alliance. At the end of it, the people applauded her performance, and the prince, who already found out it was Han, grabbed her waist closer to him, their faces only inches away from each other. Then he asked her to have an intimate moment with him. This turn of events caused Han to panic because it was not in her plans to be alone with the prince. Her point was to gain favor for Helen, but it's not turning out as she planned it to be. Oops! You might have forgotten that the prince was as smart as you, dear! At this point, Charlotte again provoked Vivian by telling her how Helen is a step closer to the prince that she's after. This stirred Vivian's mind into assuming that Helen wanted to let her know that she can win the prince's heart on her own. Filled with hatred and anger, Vivian planned to never let Helen nor Charlotte leave the ship alive. Oh, you deserve so much hate for all the darkness you bring, witch! The prince tells her to remove her disguise, so Han has no choice but to obey. She questions how he even knows that it's her, so he answers that Helen is not the one to vie for his attention like that. He then asked her to hold a rope. Naturally, she questions if he means to harm her with it, so he explains that he is supposed to show this to the most beautiful princess that night. He declares that she is quite fortunate for what she's about to witness. With a tug on the rope, an array of flying fish suddenly comes jumping from the water surface. Han finds the sight fascinating, captivated by the majestic way the fish are moving. The prince then reminds her that her 10 days are almost out, so she needs to figure out how to stay alive. Surprisingly, with a smile on her face, she tells him that even if she fails, at least she can still say that this is the most beautiful thing she has ever seen before she died. The prince is taken aback by her words, and for a moment, he can't take his eyes off her. Later on, Han seeks out Lady Vivian to tell her that Lady Helen is not feeling well, so she won't be able to greet her. Vivian then answers that she would like to give some medicine to the lady. She is clearly plotting something. As Han is carrying the medicines, she accidentally drops them, causing Vivian to yell at her viciously. She orders Han to pick it up. However, as Han does as she's told, she notices the golden orb amongst the medicine. The lady wants her to pick it up so she can command her. She manages to distract Vivian, so when she turns to Han again, the orb is already in her palm, asking her for a command. With a devious smile, Vivian tells her to put a box in Charlotte's room. Fortunately, Han is not really affected by Vivian's enchantment thanks to the help of an adorable yet slimy creature, a frog. Since Vivian is from the Frog Prince, it means that her magic will work on frogs too. As long as it touches the orb first before her, only the frog will be affected. Han inspects the box and she recognizes the emblem from Helen's kingdom. Based on the sound coming from it, there's a snake inside. Vivian plans to kill Charlotte and frame Helen for it. My gosh, Vivian sure is playing dirty! The next day, Han is surprised when Helen confronts her. She is upset that Han pretended to be her last night. With tears in her eyes, she tells her that she doesn't like scheming and plotting. She never intends to win favor by stepping on others. Han can only apologize for her actions. Helen then tells her that she's the only one she trusts and that they can find other ways to help her brothers. Meanwhile, Vivian is chattering away with the prince when Charlotte enthusiastically enters the room. Vivian is clearly dumbstruck that she is unharmed. Charlotte notices the shock, so she questions Vivian if she's not happy to see her. Vivian quickly excuses herself, questioning if her magic failed. As she exits the room, Charlotte asks the prince if the lady is upset because she found out that Charlotte will be one of the princess candidates. Charlotte sits on the prince's lap and proceeds to express her affection for him. My goodness, the two of them are shameless flirts! Meanwhile, Vivian marches off in anger. She then bumps into Han. Instantly, she viciously questions her, wanting to know everything that happened the night before. Han is quick to come up with a lie, telling the lady that she suddenly found herself outside Lady Charlotte's door and accidentally dropped the box she was holding. A sea serpent suddenly leaped out of it and slithered out to sea. Vivian speculates that there is something wrong with the orb yesterday. The reason why Han was able to snap out of it. She sharply questions Han if she has told anyone, so Han has to play the part of a scared humble maid. Satisfied, Vivian orders her to meet her at the stern in 2 days at midnight along with the box. Since her magic can only be used every 3 days, Vivian has to compromise. The next day, Charlotte is officially announced as a princess candidate. Oh, the stakes of the game just keep on getting higher! When it's time for Han to meet Vivian, she ensures that the prince has a front row seat at the magic show. As expected, Vivian drops her golden orb once again. Behind a glass window, Prince Vincent and his guards watch with bated breaths as Han picks up the orb. Meanwhile, Han is aware that Vivian will instantly get rid of her as soon as she falls into her spell. However, this is a risk she's willing to take. The moment she touches the orb, she's officially in Vivian's command. The palace guards are horrified by what they're witnessing. The prince stops them before they can act, intending to listen further. They all hear Vivian babble about how it's a shame that she failed to get rid of Helen and Charlotte. As expected, the evil Vivian orders Han to jump into the sea. OMG! How much more vile can you be? With unseeing eyes, Han does as she's told, standing near the edge to jump. The palace guards are onto Vivian in no time, and the prince rushes to try to save Han from the freezing waters. However, it's too late. His outstretched hand does nothing to stop her descent. So he jumps after her, wrapping his arms around her unconscious body before swimming to the surface. Han wakes as soon as they are out of the water, and the prince tells her she did well. Suddenly, a rogue wave crashes onto the ship, throwing the prince overboard. Charlotte then arrives at the stern, concerned for the prince. When she finds out that the prince was thrown into the sea, she is furious. Han, on the other hand, realizes that the prince falling into the sea is similar to the beginning of the story of The Little Mermaid. Charlotte announces that she'll join the search for the prince. The guards naturally protest. After all, they can't risk her as well. Han then suggests that they use ropes to ensure the lady. The people of Andorkide are excellent swimmers and can hold their breath for a long time. Charlotte is their best chance to rescue the prince. Han helps Charlotte secure the ropes. She contemplates that this is the only way to save the prince and to confirm if Charlotte really is the Little Mermaid player. Charlotte tells her that she recognizes her and asks for her name. The lady then compliments Han for being clever and even wonders if Helen will give Han to her. A prospect that horrifies Han entirely. As soon as Charlotte is underwater, she becomes a beautiful mermaid, and soon enough she locates the prince. He is in the clutches of a boy with octopus-like tentacles. The boy asks the lady if she will kiss the man like how she kissed him. Apparently, Charlotte has placed a spell on the boy, and she tells him that if he loves her, he must continue to help her win the game. Wow, talk about manipulation! Charlotte then kissed the unconscious prince. On the boat, the guards are in a panic since the prince has yet to resurface. Han quickly takes command of the situation, ordering the guards to prepare for the prince's return and to lock up Vivian. Soon enough, the prince and Charlotte return to the boat safely, much to the relief of everyone. Han then carries the prince to his room. My gosh, she is crazy strong! She now has the confirmation that Charlotte is indeed the Little Mermaid. Meanwhile, Helen goes to see the prince immediately. She intends to help him recover, telling Han that she'll take care of him from there. Helen even blames herself for not being able to protect Han and the prince from Vivian. She believes that she's the only one who does nothing, so she asks Han to let her take care of the prince since that's all she's capable of. Later on, the prince wakes up to see the slumbering Helen and Han leaning against each other. A fond expression appears on the prince's face as he stares at the sleeping Han. Ugh, you better get yourself together, prince! You better not let our Han hang! Suddenly, Helen awakes, startling Han. She fusses over the prince instantly. Prince Vincent then tells Helen that his maid helped him identify the witch, so he is assigning Han as his personal guard. Helen hesitates, clearly unwilling to part with her. However, Han drops to her knees, thanking the prince for the opportunity, but she asks for a favor to compensate her lady for the sadness she'll feel for her absence. She asks that the prince help the kingdom of Signy. Since Helen is no longer suspected, the prince assures him that he will do so. He then asks Han to be as loyal to him as she is to Helen. Later on, when Charlotte enters the prince's room when he is alone, he suddenly embraces her. Charlotte smiles in the prince's embrace before informing him that he is holding her too tight. He apologizes, not knowing what came over him. Charlotte claims that she feels like the prince loves her deeply, and the prince tells her that he does love her. Don't tell me that he's already under her spell. Meanwhile, Han and Helen are saying goodbye to each other. Han promises that no matter where she is in the future, she'll always be her friend. Aw, I hope this game does not ruin their friendship. We all want a bestie we can rely on. Later on, Han finds herself in the prince's room to give him his medicine. She doesn't see him anywhere, so she places the medicine on a table. Suddenly, when she turns back, she crashes straight into the prince's solid chest. Wah! He then orders her to sit, wanting to speak with her. Han has no choice but to obey. Ominously, Prince Vincent informs her that Vivian isn't the only witch on the ship, so he asks her if she's ever encountered other witches. The prince declares that Vivian is proof that the place isn't clean. Han is only relieved that the prince hasn't yet discovered the truth about the princess players. The prince then orders her to get his robe. After dressing him, the prince faces her, telling her that even though royal guards are supposed to swear allegiance to the emperor, he doesn't want that from her. He wants her to be loyal and obedient to him alone. He wants her to belong to him. Naturally, the idea doesn't sit well with Han. Also, she still needs to get closer to him, so she can't have him see her as only a guard. So she tells him that the reason she is so loyal to Lady Helen is because they are friends. If the prince wants the same loyalty from her, then he must be friends with her as well. Surprisingly, the prince agrees to this suspiciously quickly. Soon after declaring their so-called friendship, the prince hands her the difficult task of finding out everyone who has connections to the witch. Apparently, she has to work to gain the prince's friendship. Suddenly, Charlotte enters the room wearing a rather revealing outfit. She even calls the prince by his name, declaring that the prince probably cares more for his work than her. Instantly, the prince dismisses Han. He rushes to Charlotte and places a red ribbon around her wrist, asking her to consider it as a memento. Outside the chambers, Han thinks that was the first time she's ever heard the prince speak so gently. She speculates that he must really like Lady Charlotte, especially since he lets her call him by his name. Suddenly, the door behind her opens, revealing Charlotte herself. As a token of her congratulations, Charlotte gives her a ring as well as the ribbon given to her by the prince as a gift. Han is surprised since the ribbon is given to Charlotte by the prince, but the lady assures her that Vincent won't mind, especially since he loves her so much. Yikes, how twisted! Does he really? Han is left to wonder if bribing people is Charlotte's offensive strategy. 2 days later, Han is finally writing a reply to the Grand Duke, who has apparently been writing to her since the trip. She tells him the good news of her promotion as the prince's personal guard. She then thanks the Grand Duke for writing to her and hopes that she can thank him in person. Our Han is definitely killing the guard training. She is the first place in swordsmanship, endurance training, and tactical knowledge. She clearly doesn't do things halfway. All the other guards are desperate for her to teach them since their captain is driving them insane with all his nagging. These men are so adorable. All her endurance and tactical knowledge are thanks to her lifetime of experience in the corporate world. Most importantly, her magic birthmark allows her to avoid danger and to assess the severity at the same time. Training that day ends early, and the captain informs her that they'll have horsemanship the following day. Upon hearing this, Han is beside herself. She has never ridden a horse before. When she goes and tells Helen about her predicament later that day, her friend gives a good-natured laugh, teasing her for it. When the lady notices that Han's sleeves are torn, she stitches it up for her. Helen then declares that she'll invite the prince to go horseback riding so he can bring Han along. That way, she'll get the practice she needs. Han enthusiastically expresses her gratitude for the lady. Meanwhile, as the prince is introducing Charlotte to the emperor, he notices that the ribbon he gave her is no longer on her wrists. His father then tells him to stay a minute to discuss something. The emperor compliments him for finally knocking the kingdom of Gordon down a notch. He then tells him that there are more kingdoms hoping to form an alliance with them, so he still has more options to choose from. Unfortunately, the riding lessons do not happen the following day due to the prince's health. The emperor has ordered that the prince stay in the hunting ground to recuperate. Poor Lady Helen is left in the palace to wait for the arrival of her brother. Unfortunately, for our Han, she has to ride with the luggage because she can't ride a horse. In the hunting ground, Han is introduced to two gorgeous horses, Micah and Graphite. They are the royal family's most beloved horses. Suddenly, the prince appears to warn her not to get too close to the black one since she tends to be violent. The prince then offers that she tries to ride Micah instead. Han is about to refuse since Micah is the prince's horse, but the prince tells her that Helen asked him to teach her how to ride. The prince even threatens her that she will have to run behind them during a long trip if she doesn't learn. Vincent takes her hand to touch the horse, but when the horse exhales on her hand, she flinches. She grasped the prince's hand, causing him to stare at her with an odd look once again. Suddenly, the prince becomes dizzy, worrying Han. She suggests calling the doctor, but he refuses, telling her to get on the horse instead. In the middle of their bickering, Lady Charlotte arrives, so Han takes this opportunity to escape. In the stables, Zane is hard at work, feeding the horses diligently. But the other workers have no respect for him, ordering him to shovel manure instead. He doesn't rise to their insults. Instead, he turns away from them. One of the men continues to disrespect him, but the hard kick from someone shuts him up. When he sees the sword that struck the ground, he knows he's in trouble. Han declares that injustice is not tolerated on palace grounds. The man blames Zane for the commotion, arguing that he is cursed by the witch, so he can't work with them. Han will not stand for his prejudices, so she tells him that Zane did not harm anyone, nor did he behave monstrously. As she sheaths her sword, she tells the cruel man to reflect on his actions. "You go, girl. I have a soft spot for him, so you better protect him." Later on, Han and Zane walk side by side. He tells her how their hometown is known as the Witch's Cradle, and how the people there were once controlled by them. Later, the Gilded Rose of the Empire freed them, but this angered the witches. In retaliation, they curse his people, so no matter where they go, they are feared and hated, forever a lonely race. Zane wonders why Han doesn't know about this, so she quickly reasons that the region that she's from is small, and her family doesn't discuss such matters. With a charming smile on his face, he tells her that she's the only person he knows who doesn't know about their history. Han notices how lonely he is and remembers how she felt the same in the real world. Wanting to cheer him up, she grabs his arm and tells him to enjoy a little feast with her to celebrate her promotion as a palace guard. He hesitates, fearing what others might say about Han. She assures him that no one would dare to start a rumor about the prince's personal guard, so he eventually gives in. They are so adorable together. The two enjoy a pretty domestic moment. They cooked and ate together. They even fed the cutest baby horse in the stable. All the while, Zane looks at her with a fond expression. The next day, the prince and Charlotte are flirting once again before the prince goes off hunting. She promises the prince that she'll have something special waiting for him that night. She then notices that the prince is still upset that she doesn't have the ribbon anymore. As he walks away, she plans to get the ribbon back from Han to placate the prince. The flowers she asked for had finally arrived, so she sent them to the prince's room, wanting to arrange it herself. The love that the prince feels can only last 7 days, so she needs something more powerful to strengthen her grip on him. Meanwhile, Han and the prince are by the lake. She notices that he is even more aloof than usual. Suddenly, the prince has Vivian's golden orb in his hand. He wants to test if someone other than a witch can use it. He needs someone he can trust to experiment. Unfortunately for Han, she is the unlucky candidate. He drops the orb and orders her to pick it up. She obeys, and instantly she is under his command. He orders her to answer him honestly and then asks if she is a witch. Without hesitation, Han, who is still in a trance, answers that she is not. After some time, Han becomes conscious again, confused as to what happened. She asks the prince if the experiment was a success. He answers that it is, but refuses to tell her what he made her do. She playfully trips him, and he gives her a look like he wants to kill her. The two of them begin to bicker, with the prince using the whip to try to hit her. When she manages to steal it from him while bragging about her successful guard training, he grabs her arm. However, they lose their balance and end up falling into the water with Han on top of Vincent. Ah! They stare at one another in a daze, but the moment is ruined when the prince feels a sudden headache. Juana asks Vincent if he's all right after they have soaked, and he assures her there's nothing to worry about. He then asks if she can walk back with Micah, but she insists on his immediate need to see the doctor. Before he can respond, Graphite gallops into the forest, leaving her anxious about the prince's safety. Debating whether to ride or walk, Han recalls Zane's words that horses are gentle despite their size. Determined, she decides to chase after the prince. Meanwhile, Charlotte holds a flower, noting it is the last day of the spell, and affirms that Vincent shall not disappoint her. What are you planning to do this time, Charlotte? When Vincent and Juana arrive, the butlers greet them and ask if they're all right. However, Vincent teases Juana about riding the horse, questioning when she learned it. He offers to teach her to ride, and she reluctantly agrees, remembering his previous failure of him teaching her how to ride a horse. As they walk to the mansion, Vincent asks for Charlotte. The guard informs him that the princess led a search into the forest when he did not return by sunset. Vincent advises Juana to gather the men to find the princess and decides to wait in his room, though Juana expects him to see his doctor. He insists he will see the doctor the next day. Entering his room, he is amazed by the yellow flowers. However, he becomes dizzy from their scent, and as he is about to pass out, is caught by a lady he concludes to be Charlotte because of the ribbon that falls from her. When he asks her if she's behind this, he leans on her shoulder dizzy. "You shouldn't be fazed by beautiful things, my prince, as it will deceive you." Meanwhile, hiding behind a tree, Charlotte hears the scream of royal guards searching for her deep in the forest at the prince's request. She becomes anxious, trying to figure out how to escape them before the full moon rises, while the floral fragrance makes her horse restless. However, the royal guards are alarmed by the noise made by Zane hiding in the bushes. Meanwhile, her horse starts to gallop upon hearing the sound and falls off, increasing her anxiety. Earlier, the royal guard had advised Juana to change her clothes, which she complied as her suit got wet from the accident earlier. As she walks through the hallway, Zane taps her from behind, informing her that the golden gallflowers had been plucked, causing the female horse to go into heat. Back in Vincent's room, he mistakes Juana for Charlotte as she enters. Seeing her ribbon, he talks about how she still has it. She observes his changed behavior, noting that he has inhaled a lot of the floral fragrance. Vincent pins her against the wall and is about to kiss her when she punches him, causing him to pass out completely. Once he is unconscious, she observes the room and concludes that there are too many gallflowers. As she carries him to his bed, she thinks this might be her chance to seduce the prince. Just as she is about to leave, he holds her hand and pleads with her not to go. Vincent begs Juana to stay until morning, still believing she is Charlotte. She thinks the floral fragrance's effect hasn't worn off and plans to use another dose to keep him unconscious. Her eyes almost swell when he hugs her from behind and says he knows her intentions. Vincent accuses her of not loving him and pretending because of their political marriage. Han wonders if he's still referring to Charlotte. He praises the flowers, thinking she loves him, and compares her to Vivian, noting her cleverness and desperation to win. Despite their imperfect match, he still loves her. Meanwhile, Zane approaches Charlotte, considering Juana's request to delay Charlotte's return. Charlotte asks if he was sent to save her and demands they return immediately, but he advises waiting until morning due to her sprained leg. She becomes furious and manipulates him, saying touching a princess is a serious crime. Juana realizes Vincent knows Charlotte's plan. While hugging her, he says it's a royal move and admits he wants her to love him. Back with Charlotte, she continues to beg to return to the palace. Instead, Zane advises that she has to stop moving to avoid more injury. Meanwhile, Helen looks out the window, eager to tell her brother about her new friend and everything that has happened. Morning comes and Charlotte wakes up while he's carrying her. She asks if he has been walking all night, to which he replies that he carried her because she might injure her legs further if she moved too quickly. When Charlotte arrives at the mansion, she pretends to be happy that Vincent made it safely. However, she is shocked when he asks about the flowers and throws a box filled with flowers and a rat, causing the rat to heat up. Juana explains that the flower is used to make the horses heat up, and asks why she placed the flower in his room. Charlotte immediately runs towards Vincent and pretends that she hurt her legs from falling off the horse, while looking up at him and claiming she couldn't commit such a heinous act because she loves him. Meanwhile, the gardener sees that the royal guards capture 2 ranches, which blames to have stolen and used the flower against the royal highness. This evil girl, how can she frame 2 innocent people? Vincent believes what Charlotte says and hands her the ribbon, adding that she should not disappoint him again. On the other hand, Juana notices that the affection in his eyes from the previous night has disappeared. After Charlotte and Vincent's confrontation, Juana tells them that the 2 ranches have no reason to do such a thing and insists that it was Charlotte's doing. She also mentions that of him tied up early in the morning. Earlier, when Juana entered Vincent's room, he immediately requested to be untied on the count of 3. However, she made sure he wouldn't strangle her, remembering what he did the previous night that made her tie him to the bed. She added that it was for her own safety because she was unsure what he might do, and she might not return to the palace alive. Vincent also asked if she figured out what Charlotte used against him, to which she replied that it was gallflower. It is used to heat up horses and make humans a bit crazy. She also asked if he was certain it was Charlotte, and he responded that he was sure, as he was not born yesterday. Afterwards, the palace welcomes Helen, but there is confusion about whom she is with. A tall man with hair the same color as Helen's approaches Vincent and Juana and introduces himself as Helen's brother, Castor. He expresses gratitude to Vincent and Juana for saving his sister. Castor is talkative, and Vincent finds it difficult to handle. As Helen approaches them, she apologizes for her brother and mentions that he often speaks too much. He even shares that his sister is afraid of intimate contact with men, which infuriates his sister. This man can't read the room. Vincent asks if what Castor said is true. Helen immediately kneels, apologizing for deceiving him, explaining that she only did it to stay by his side. Castor reveals that Helen's previous caretaker used to beat her, causing her to fear men, which led her to deception. Vincent reassures Helen that he doesn't care about her lie. He recalls their first meeting and how, despite her fear of men, she still loves him. He then offers to take a walk in the garden. Initially, Helen fears he might push her, but he reassures her that the only punishment he'll give is to never let go of her hand. Vincent's tender side is surprisingly endearing. Watching them, Juana realizes that Helen is making progress, leaving her unsure of her own feelings. Castor interrupts her thoughts, suggesting they get along since she's Helen's best friend. Meanwhile, Charlotte's maid mentions a problem with her wheelchair and goes to find a guard to fix it. Alone, Charlotte hears Juana ask about the wheelchair and responds with a glare. Juana suspects Charlotte knows she gave the ribbon to Vincent and fears being blamed if Charlotte loses her status. Despite the stare of Charlotte, Juana quickly tightens a loose screw. Instead of gratitude, Charlotte accuses Juana of causing Vincent to distance himself. Juana realizes she's now part of the game, despite being just a guard. When Juana's tears start to fall, Castor intervenes, saying his sister looks beautiful when she cries, and mocking Charlotte's ugly crying, insisting she explain her mistakes to His Highness. Irritated, Charlotte tells Juana to finish their conversation later and demands her maid to take her back to the palace. After Charlotte leaves, Juana laughs, making fun of Charlotte's expressions and thanking Castor for having her back. Castor admits he can't stand Charlotte. Juana calls him a jock type, which he doesn't understand. Afterwards, Juana visits Vivienne and asks about her contacts and travel companions. However, Vivienne becomes aggressive and her maids force Juana to keep her distance. Juana calmly states she will report the incident to Vincent. In Vincent's office, Juana shares detailed information about Vivienne's interactions with 200 people since arriving at the palace, impressing Vincent. He notices that he and Helen are among the contacts and orders the execution of everyone listed, except for them. Juana is disturbed by this, but Vincent dismisses her concern, prioritizing dealing with the witch. Upset, Juana struggles with the decision to take lives, which Vincent notices. He explains that executions for theft are common and that she won't have to carry them out herself. Juana insists the condemned should live without regrets and throws a party for them, with Helen and Castor's help. After the party, all the servants mysteriously disappear. Even though Vincent's birthday is still a few weeks away, the town is already celebrating, spearheaded by the Emperor. It's a celebration that will last for 2 weeks. Merchants and nobility have gathered at the capital, bringing exotic creatures from all over the world and wishing for the glory of the Empire. How exciting! I'd love to experience this kind of celebration, but 2 weeks seems a bit too much. The general orders all the guards to monitor everyone entering the capital and report any suspicious activity, especially regarding the witch. He also instructs Juana to take a break as ordered by the prince, noting that things have been tough for her lately. She gets a lecture when she brings up the unfair treatment of commoners and Vivienne. Feeling downcast, Juana walks through the garden and notices the plants she planted are growing. Lost in thought, she is startled when someone taps her shoulder. It's Castor. He asks her to accompany him for a stroll outside the palace. While walking, Castor asks Juana to help him choose the best gift for Vincent, explaining that he wants to assist his sister. Juana replies that Vincent values the sentiments behind gifts and anything from Helen would be appreciated. Castor doesn't respond immediately, but instead holds up a dog mask and suggests they enjoy the town. He just wants her to take a break and enjoy the stroll with him. As they continue their conversation, a young lady tries to steal Castor's wallet. Juana quickly catches her, showcasing her skills as a royal guard. Feeling pity for the girl, they bring her to a restaurant, but the patrons gossip about her being under a witch's curse and demand she leave. The waiter echoes their sentiments, but Juana defends the girl, insisting she deserves a meal. Despite Juana's defense, the girl runs out, feeling she doesn't need their sympathy. After the girl leaves, the waiter insults Juana, prompting Castor to become furious. He warns the waiter to watch his words, declaring that Juana is his fiancée. To make it more convincing, he kneels down, holds her hand, and asks her to marry him. Wow, Castor really went that far? Then he's absolutely cool for doing it. Juana can't believe that Castor is doing it in front of everyone. It isn't the plan she expects to win the game. He adds that even though he's a baron, he'll be good to her as long as she's no longer working. When everyone hears he's a baron, they shout for her to accept his proposal, believing he'll be able to protect her from the witch. Wait, he's actually serious about his proposal? Despite the people's pleas for her to accept his proposal, Juana gets angry and says it's a private matter between them. She insists that she isn't putting on a show for their entertainment. Meanwhile, a girl who runs out sees what happens and thinks Juana is cool. When they finally get a chance to talk, Castor apologizes for what he did, explaining that it was because of his sister and how he was raised as an illegitimate child. Juana forgives him right away, but the waiter keeps interrupting them. To distract the waiter, she asks why people have been saying that the witch has made things unstable lately. The waiter explains that after the assassination attempts, rumors of the witch's appearance have spread everywhere. Gossip says that the witch murders people and recruits others to build an army to start a war. He also adds that the witch looks like an ordinary person. Upon hearing this, Juana realizes that the men judge the girl for their safety against the witch. Meanwhile, Castor gets drunk and starts murmuring about how much he loves Juana. Vincent and Helen see her struggling to carry the wasted Castor after drinking. Vincent immediately approaches them, and Castor starts saying things that make Juana cover his mouth. Vincent offers to carry Castor instead, and they walk through the town. Helen says that being with them is the happiest day of her life. Juana is amused by the float parade, and Helen confirms that it will continue until the day of the banquet. While carrying Castor, Vincent hears him blabbering nonsense and reeking of alcohol. Vincent is shocked when Castor mentions the proposal and immediately pins him against the wall of the shop. Vincent asks if Castor likes Juana, and Castor says yes. He adds that Juana can't be a royal guard forever and needs to have a family soon. His answer made Vincent leave him helpless and drunk. When Vincent returns to Helen and Juana, he suggests that Helen should look after her brother, who is resting against the wall of the shop. Helen leaves for Castor, leaving Juana and Vincent alone. Afterward, Vincent asks Juana if she got him a present, but she says she can't afford one. She senses that isn't the real reason he wants to talk to her. Their conversation becomes intense and leads to shouting as the float parade begins. Vincent shouts that she could have rejected Castor, which she did, and this calms him down. As they speak, the float showers the town with beautiful petals. Their moment is interrupted by the captain of the royal guard. When Helen sees Castor, he advises her to run away. However, it's too late. Thugs, knowing she's the Baron's sister, block her path and push her to the ground. She's helpless and begs Juana to save her. Meanwhile, Juana senses something is wrong with Helen and rushes to her. By the time she arrives, Vincent is already there, saving Helen from the thugs. However, the thieves stab Vincent, claiming it's all for the witch. Helen feels guilty for his injury, but is relieved that he's grateful for her safety and longs for her embrace. Helen promises not to push him away anymore. Seeing them, Juana feels a mix of jealousy and gratitude, thankful that Helen is all right. Afterwards, they return to the palace, and Castor receives immediate medical attention. As they settle down, Juana wonders why the assailants disguised themselves as thieves and why they knew the prince was out of the palace. While pondering this, the butler informs her that Vincent wants to see her immediately. She hurries to his room, where Vincent introduces her to his father as a bodyguard worthy of attention due to her pleasant appearance. His father acknowledges her and expresses relief that Vincent is in good hands, especially since the situation outside is so dangerous. Vincent's father is pleased that Juana is taking good care of his son and leaves to rest. Once his father is gone, Vincent apologizes for his behavior earlier. He reveals that his father wants to surround him with women to secure a political marriage, and adds that his father accepted her as a personal guard due to her beauty. Hearing this, Juana can't believe Vincent would say such a thing and thinks he's being flirtatious. Vincent also realizes that it's good she rejected Castor's proposal. Juana recalls their conversation in the market. He was once a cold figure, a display behind walls that women couldn't approach, but now she feels she has found the key to open the cage. Without hesitation, she asks if he will marry her. Vincent is caught off guard and doesn't know how to respond. She presses further, asking what she needs to do to marry him, but he says only a princess can marry a royal. Juana insists she is one. Looks like you're really determined to play the game, aren't you? Way to go, Juana! Vincent asks if Juana likes him, which she confirms, though he hasn't sensed it. He is even more shocked when she presses her lips against his. Afterward, she asks if he now senses her feelings and says she doesn't want to be just friends. She wants more. Juana bids him goodbye, leaving him to wonder why someone like her exists, especially since she isn't even a princess. After Juana leaves Vincent's room, she collapses on the ground, contemplating what she just did. She doubts he has true feelings for both Charlotte and Helen. She recalls when he smelled the gallflowers and seemed affected by them. Frustrated by his confusing actions, she feels like kicking him. The next day, Vincent gives gifts from various kingdoms and welcomes Lilith Grimm from the Kingdom of Grimm. Her gift honors those who fought against the witch. His father is delighted and reminisces about their victory over the witch. Lady Grimm mentions the palace as a place for evil to flee, amusing his father. Vincent's father asks his thoughts on Lady Grimm, and Vincent quickly grabs her hand and kisses it. Lady Grimm talks about the other women who came before her, proudly saying he will soon have eyes only for her. Afterward, Juana asks Vincent for permission to send off Castor at Helen's request. He replies that she can do it after she confesses her love to him, to which she retorts that she has a life. Before she leaves, he mentions the upcoming celebration to introduce his 3 noble ladies to the public. She promises to tighten security during the event. He asks if she's jealous, but she doesn't respond. He also requests that she visit the new royal tailor for a ceremony uniform, sensing he's stalling her. He jokes about needing more layers as the weather gets chilly. Meanwhile, Castor bids goodbye to Helen, eagerly awaiting Juana's arrival. He advises Helen to do better for her siblings, which she wishes him well. On the other hand, Lilith hides near Helen, thinking the worst that she can do. She seems worse than Charlotte. What is she planning already? The prince has decided to open the palace exhibit to the public. At present, Helen and Lilith are there to look around. They are talking about how the prince is determined to get closer to the people. Moments later, Juana appears, apologizing for being late. Helen assures her that it's all right while holding her hand. Lilith, on the other hand, is casting suspicious glances at Juana. As they are going around the exhibit, one of the guards notices them and comments about how often Lilith visits the place. For some reason, Lilith is quick to interrupt him, saying that she came back because of a toy she spotted. Not suspicious at all. Truth is, Juana also has the same sentiments. The reason she rushed all the way there is because she is worried about what Lilith is capable of. Soon enough, Lilith spots the said toy, and it's a horse figure. She excitedly explains its cool feature, ordering her maid to demonstrate. The maid nervously obeys, turning the gear to make the horse move. Helen is so fascinated by it that she asks if she can try it. The maid is about to hand the toy to her when Juana notes how her hand is shaking. Instantly, she knows that there's something wrong. She blocks Helen from touching the toy, pointing out that there's some kind of oil on the toy. She dares the maid to lick her finger. When she does, the maid quickly drops to the ground, writhing in pain. Juana is furious at Lilith, accusing her of wanting to harm Helen. Even Helen confronts her about her numerous visits to the exhibit. But Lilith slyly commands the guard to arrest the maid, pinning the blame on the poor maid. Juana now knows that Lilith is clever enough to plan a situation where she can easily shift the blame on the poor maid. She's even more frightening than Vivian. The poor maid begs for her life, and the kind-hearted Helen feels sorry for her. She declares that she will deal with the maid herself. Lilith mockingly tells her that if she intends to use the maid to frame her, then her efforts are futile. She even calls Helen naive and questions how she managed to survive so long. Later on, while the maid is resting, Juana questions if it's safe to let the maid stay with Helen, but Helen assures her that she will send the maid away from the palace as soon as she awakens. Seeing Juana's worried expression, Helen then adds that she knows that it's not just sheer luck that ensures her survival. She's aware that it's because of Vincent, Juana, and her brother. That's why she wants to become stronger so she can protect the people she loves. No, Helen sure has a sweet soul. I desperately wish that she never changes. Juana, at this point, wants the two of them to be true friends, and for that to happen, she has to tell Helen the truth about her identity. But she realizes that this is not the time, especially since she's about to do something reckless. It is easier for Helen to lose a character than a real friend. Later on, Juana is about to give a report to the prince, but is stopped because the prince has a guest, namely Lilith. Due to this, a seething Charlotte is standing nearby. But he eventually schools her expression into a pleasant one. She merely asks the guard to tell the prince that they shall see each other at the banquet. The next day, a sleepless Juana is greeted by none other than Zane. In her past life, in order to become the top idol, Charlotte had to resort to all kinds of tricks, from deliberately outshining her teammates to lying to her fans, all so she could be loved by everyone. The last thing she remembers before passing away is wanting to go back so she can continue to earn everyone's love. Now, in this princess game she somehow ended up in, she's even willing to join forces with Lilith in order to win. She even tricks the other girl into thinking that her ability is turning water into blades that can stab her from within. Lilith has no choice but to agree, which satisfies Charlotte greatly. She expects Lilith to do what she has to at the banquet. Meanwhile, Juana learns from Zane that the liquid from the toy that almost harmed Helen is merely juice from a weed, with no magic traces whatsoever. Juana is upset because she wasn't able to catch Lilith red-handed. Seeing her so down, Zane pats her head and asks if she needs anything. Juana grins brightly, telling him that his return is the biggest help already. Helen, on the other hand, is having trouble with the maid she took in. Lilith's maid insists on returning to her master, claiming that Lilith's madness is beyond their imagination. Lilith arrives home and quickly gets in bed. She then begins talking to her master, apologizing for falling for Charlotte's tricks. The master answers, telling her that they're willing to sacrifice everything for their dreams. Oh my god, how creepy! What is she up to, really? Her maid finally arrives not long after. The maid is reluctant to do her bidding, telling her that Helen is a good person. But then Lilith tells her that Lady Charlotte has threatened her to frame Helen tonight, or else she will stab her with a knife. The poor maid is so shocked that she falls to the ground. Later on, Prince Vincent and Juana enter the Emperor's office and find him speaking with Lord Cade, the police chief. The Earl is proud that he managed to apprehend several members of the cursed tribe, pinning the blame on them and regarding the recent incidents involving the witch. He brags that they will be executed and will be presented as a congratulatory gift on the prince's birthday. These people are sick. What is wrong with these people? Juana is already contemplating the loss of innocent lives. Vincent senses her urge to defend the weak, so he holds her hand, telling her not to be harsh. He then tells the Earl and the Emperor that they should postpone the execution for another month, since he doesn't want the princess candidates to be frightened. Thankfully, the Emperor agrees with his idea. Later on, he tells Juana that the reason he asks for a month is because he knows that she wants to save them, so he is giving her time to do so. The gesture makes Juana smile, pointing out that the prince has changed somehow. Juana and Vincent are discussing the position of the guards during the banquet. Juana points out that she used Helen's near poisoning as a pretext, just as he instructed. Vincent wants to hunt the witch, so he lays a trap in his birthday celebration. He talked his way into having the witch's orb on display at the exhibit, wanting to use it as bait to lure the witch or any of her followers into stealing the powerful object. What he did not anticipate was Juana wanting to make her own move. She volunteers to guard the orb herself. However, Vincent gives her a firm no. But Juana is nothing if not determined, so she keeps on insisting that having someone as deceptively weak as her guarding the orb is an advantage. She even excitedly tells him that with this action, she can finally be knighted and is one step closer to marrying him. Angered, Vincent pins her on the table. He vexingly explains that she would be risking her life for an impossible love. Juana, not one to back down, reminds him that it's not hopeless when his attitude towards her is changing. They continue to bicker until Helen arrives and senses the hostile atmosphere. Vincent then leads Helen outside, but not before threatening Juana to think of something else. Tonight's banquet is not quite the real deal yet. It's more like a pre-celebration before the actual birthday celebration. The attendees are a few high-ranking nobles who are close to the royal family. Everyone is celebrating the arrest of the so-called witch, Vivian. Later on, Vincent and Helen are dancing when Helen asks him if he was arguing with Juana earlier. She cares for them both, so she doesn't want to see them at odds with each other. She's so kind. I beg you, Lady Helen, don't ever change. Vincent simply tells her not to worry about such things. He flirts with her as they dance. In his mind, he acknowledges that she is currently the best candidate since she is kind and considerate. She also obviously loves him very much. However, he still needs to have all the cards to play. As long as he continues to stir the water, the fish continue to swim. Suddenly, he spots Juana outside wearing the uniform that he has commissioned for her. The new outfit rather suits her. However, the thing that upsets him is that she is wearing it to meet someone else. As he watches her walk away with Zane, he wonders if it's too late to surrender. Meanwhile, Lilith and Charlotte plot Helen's demise. Lilith worries that the servant Charlotte entrusted to bring Helen to the garden might betray them. But Charlotte assures her that the servants won't know Helen is the one in the bag. They'll think it's just soil for the garden. Charlotte expresses her desire to see Helen one last time before she's completely destroyed. Lilith agrees with a malicious smile. In the garden, Juana tells Zane about the Nawu tribe's plight in the capital. Zane is upset, realizing why his mother hasn't replied to his letters. He grabs a plant until his hand bleeds, despairing that he can't save his mother and his people because he's just a gardener. His anger is interrupted when Juana embraces him, saying the camellia he once gave her was the most beautiful flower she's ever seen. Comforted by her warmth, Zane wraps his arms around her too. I'm sorry guys, but I low-key ship them. No, I totally ship them. Suddenly, they hear two men complaining about carrying a sack of soil. Zane becomes suspicious, having already inspected the soil. They are shocked when the bag moves, revealing legs. The situation worsens when a drunk Lord Cade arrives, calling out to a lady, and a light zaps him on the forehead, knocking him out. Meanwhile, a maid informs the prince that she saw Lady Charlotte with Lord Cade in the garden. When Charlotte opens her eyes, Lord Cade is beside her, and several eyes are looking down on her. Charlotte dreams that she won the game and is back home. She dreams that she is once again the princess in everyone's eyes. But then she wakes with everyone judging her, not letting her explain one bit. She realizes that Lilith has set her up instead of Helen. When Lord Cade wakes up, he instantly accuses her of seducing him. He even tells everyone that a maid gave him a note from Charlotte earlier, asking him to meet her in the garden. Everyone is quick to deem her unworthy of being a princess candidate, especially when the prince says that the handwriting on the notes looks awfully like Charlotte's. The Emperor is quick to forgive Lord Cade, but he instantly removes Charlotte from the princess candidate and announces her exile. These people are horrid. I know Charlotte was trying to set Helen up, but let the woman explain. As a last resort, Charlotte states how Lord Cade is known for his sadistic tendencies, so if he really did touch her, his marks would have been all over her body. She then removes her clothes to prove that he did not betray the prince. This is horrible. She's a terrible person, but I feel so bad for her. With tears in her eyes, she begs the prince to believe her. At that moment, like a knight in shining armor, Zane appears and wraps a coat around Charlotte. He declares that the princess is innocent and he can prove it. My goodness, I love him even more now. Zane explains that he was trimming the shrubs when he saw Lord Cade carrying a woman in his arms. Cade is quick to deny the allegation, yanking Charlotte's hair as he declares that the woman is already there when he arrives. All the while, Charlotte weeps, saying that she doesn't remember anything. She wonders why Zane is saving her again like he did in the hunting ground. The Emperor is quick to speculate that Zane, a member of the Nawud tribe, is doing this as revenge against Lord Cade, who has arrested many of his people. Determined, Zane explains that the garden has recently been renovated, which means that the soil is still moist and will show footprints. Since the Earl was sneaking into the garden with the woman in his arms, then only his footprints would be embedded in the soil. However, if Lord Cade is claiming that Lady Charlotte was already waiting for him, then a set of prints from a woman's foot should be there too. Vincent, on the other hand, knows that Zane's words are not really his, but Juana's. Clearly, the two of them were together and she had instructed him to say these things. They then check if Zane's words are indeed true, and unsurprisingly, only Lord Cade's footprints are seen. He is swiftly arrested, and Charlotte is cleared of all the accusations. Later on, Vincent summons Juana and tells her that she can now guard the orb like she wants. She questions his decision, especially since he was so against it earlier. Solemnly, he tells her how she confuses him, which is why he won't get in her way anymore. The prince tries to dismiss Juana, stating that having to guard the orb for 3 days won't be easy. But of course, Juana does not heed his words. Instead, she sits on the couch. She tells him that he can punish her later for her insubordination. He replies she ought not to take such risks. She then questions if he hates risks, and he answers that he doesn't make a move without preparations. Wanting to provoke him, she mentions that he is so used to dealing with princesses that surely he can handle a mere servant like her. Irritated, he leans closer to her, saying that she already knows the answer to that. Juana can feel her finger tingling, which means danger, but she still remains there. Instead, she blocks his vision with her hand, telling him that since he gets confused if he looks at her, then he can tell her why he is pushing her away like that. The prince then tells her that he wants to end her life because she takes advantage of his weakness. The closer they are, the more she cuts him open. The more attached he is to her, the more he wants to harm her. He even claims that he wanted to slay her and the gardener when he heard Zane speak the same way she would. Now, that's not very healthy. This prince seriously needs an attitude adjustment. Unfazed, Juana points out that despite all that, he still did not harm Zane because he knows that Juana would not have liked it. Her words only irritate him even more, so he orders her to leave. But Juana clearly sees that his ears are bright red. Oh, stop it, Vincent. We clearly see that you have the markings of a tsundere. The next day, Helen is preparing for the banquet when Lilith, together with her maid, Zinnia, arrives to greet her. But later on, Helen speaks with Zinnia privately. She worries about her bruises, questioning if it was Lilith who caused them. She even questions if it's because Zinnia led her away last night that Lilith targeted Charlotte instead. However, Zinnia refuses to speak. Helen is worried that Lilith's tricks would end up harming the prince. Zinnia then gives Helen a weapon, asking her to give it to the prince and have it on him at all times. Zane has to help with the investigation involving his tribe, so he has to leave for some time. Juana sees him off and even prepares a huge luggage for him. However, she stops rambling when she notices that Zane is staring at her. I apologize, guys. I may be Team Zane at this point. He then caresses her face before confessing that he likes her. After what happened the night before, he told himself that he would finally tell her about his feelings. However, Juana apologizes to him, saying that she can't like him. Even though she feels comfortable and warm with him, she thinks that they should remain friends. She confesses that she has to leave in 2 years, and she doesn't want to hurt him. He is confused, asking why she has to leave, but Juana can't explain it to him. Understanding as always, he tells her that she can tell him later. He declares that he's willing to wait for her, and he is willing to be hurt by her. Aw, that is a man right there. Vincent, you need to step up your game. Keep up. Overwhelmed, Juana hugs him, saying that she'll think about it more carefully. They are interrupted when a maid arrives to hand Zane a gift from Charlotte. Even though Zane hesitates, he still accepts it after Juana deems it safe. He tells the maid to give his thanks to the lady. The maid then delivers his message to Charlotte. When the maid mentions that Zane was with Juana, she comments that he may like Juana because she's filled with light, unlike her. The maid then nervously points out that they should get inside since everyone is gossiping about her. However, Charlotte doesn't care anymore. She no longer needs the love and attention of others. She is free. You go, girl. Major character development coming up. The palace's courtyard is officially open for Prince Vincent's birthday. The citizens are amazed to finally get a glimpse of the handsome prince and his beautiful princess candidates. As Vincent, Lilith, and Helen greet the people, Juana is looking at them from her position below. She notes that the prince did not even look at her. Is he really sticking with his words? Later on, the prince and princess are in the sitting room when Vincent notices that Zinnia is there when she is the one who tried to poison Helen. Lilith explains that Helen showed the maid mercy. The prince knows of her kind-hearted nature, but Lilith decides to add fuel to the fire by saying that she fears that secrets from her kingdom might be jeopardized if Zinnia stays with Helen. Helen quickly defends herself, but Vincent knows that he has to scold Helen for her actions. Before he can do so, Zinnia kneels before him, saying that Helen has never asked for any secret. Zinnia's action oddly reminds him of Juana. In his anger, he quickly dismisses the subject. When the prince and Helen leave the room, Lilith threatens her maid. She then starts talking maniacally, declaring that she'll do anything for her master. Okay, she's getting even more creepier. For the prince, love is just calculations. You give something valuable and you receive affection in return. But if you make the wrong move, you pay the wrong price entirely. When Lilith tries to tell him to not love the others and to only give his heart to her, all he can do is use his words to appease her delusions. As he looks out the window and sees Juana guarding the orb, he thinks that a gambler who hastily gives everything away could never win. On the last day of the exhibit, the captain of the Royal Guards gives him a report, and when he mentions that the guard who got injured the most is Juana, he quickly stops himself, not wanting to piss off the prince even more. The prince barely reacts, merely ordering him to keep a close eye on things. However, when the captain is helping him wear his cloak, he angrily tells Juana to not tie the cloak so tightly, only to realize that she's not there. LOL, someone is missing our dear Juana. Suddenly, the captain hands him a box, saying that Juana has asked that he give the box to the prince if he ever mentions her name. He opens it and sees a chain with a horse figure at the end, a gift for his birthday. A smile blooms on his face as he reads the message. As he rushes to where Juana is, he thinks about how he hates gamblers, especially since Juana is turning him into one. Soon enough, he is standing before Juana, and she quickly smiles at him, asking him if it took 3 days for him to think of her. The truth is, he thought of her every day. The prince magnanimously gives the other soldiers permission to drink in the square as long as Juana remains with him there, saying that he has something to discuss with her. Vincent has brought them dinner, and he wants them to eat it there. Despite Juana's bewilderment, she agrees to his whim. That is how they end up sitting next to each other awkwardly until Juana asks him why he wants to eat there. The prince reasons that he doesn't want to be seen by anyone. Juana decides to act like a goofball and jokingly replies that even though he doesn't like her gift, it wasn't bad enough that he should harm her. But to her surprise, the prince suddenly holds her waist and confronts her for recklessly kissing him last time. Juana sputters to get any word out, so the prince merely tells her to eat. All of a sudden, the prince tells her how dangerous it is to be loved by him. He knows that having a true lover is a vulnerability, and he won't hesitate to leave her behind if the situation becomes even more dire. He asks if she is prepared to pay the price of being loved by a prince. Juana then holds his hand, telling him that being loved by her is not sunshine and rainbows as well. He can't expect her to tolerate his annoying qualities like the other princesses, but she wants to give it a shot. So the two of them decide to start the journey of love together despite the dangers in every corner. However, no matter how touching the moment is, something is bound to ruin it. Suddenly, the lights go out and the courtyard becomes silent. The two of them know that it could be the witch. The prince urges her to go back and look for some guards, but Juana is determined to earn her knighthood. The prince tries to argue, but no one can stop a determined Juana. He hesitantly allows her to stay, but he makes her swear to not die on him. As Vincent rushes to find some guards, Lilith appears before Juana. Juana is quick to hold her sword, but she still tries to keep her calm. Lilith tells her that she merely wants to have a final look at the exhibit. Of course, Juana is not fooled, especially since she can feel her finger tingling. Unfortunately, a curious maid calls out to her, so Juana tries to warn her. However, it's too late, for Lilith has already zapped a small light on her forehead, causing the maid to lose consciousness. Lilith then mockingly says that she will not make Juana suffer. Well, Lilith has always been evil in our eyes. This is not a surprise at all. Juana, at that moment, is already panicking. She rapidly tries to think of a plan to get away, and she decides to risk it all and grabs the orb. Lilith causes an explosion that blocks her way, and she loses grip of the orb. Lilith then smugly thanks her for basically handing the orb to her and unwittingly picks it up, unaware of how the orb actually works. She loses her will to the magic of the orb, and Juana easily commands her to faint. Vincent and some guards arrive soon after. They try to restrain the unconscious Lilith, but the unknown entity wakes Lilith up, letting her use her strength to overpower the guards. Juana is harshly thrown at a distance, weakening her considerably. Vincent is instantly by her side, but she tries to tell him to run away. However, Vincent does no such thing. Instead, he faces Lilith fearless. Lilith then reveals that she is not a princess, but a witch, and she wants Vincent to die by her hands. As Lilith draws closer, Juana, even though she's barely conscious, is frustrated that the prince refuses to flee. Didn't he say that he wouldn't hesitate to abandon her? She knows that if he perishes, then the game would be over for her too, so why is he staying? Lilith is about to strike the prince with her magic, but for some reason, her power fizzles when it goes near the prince. Lilith is taken aback and horrified that her power is not working. At that moment, Helen appears with the royal guards and tells her to stop. She explains that the reason for her failure is the maid who she hurts cruelly. Turns out, Zinnia is part of a clan whose hair can cast a protective charm. The maid gave some of her hair to the prince, which is now in the form of the tassel that Helen has gifted him. Lilith expresses her anger at the situation, wanting to hurt Zinnia. However, it is undeniable that she's cornered. She declares that if her master can't have the orb, then no one will. She picks it up and with a maniacal expression, throws herself into the fire. My God, that girl is definitely unhinged. Later on, Juana shoots up from the bed she is lying on, panicked for the prince's sake, only for her to see him sitting on the chair next to her. She instantly asks him rapid questions, wanting to know if she still gets the credit for capturing Lilith. When the prince remains serious, she even starts joking around, but the prince remains solemn. When she finally asks him what's wrong, the prince tells her that he realized that he can't lose her. Took you long enough. You better start treating her right. Juana is left speechless as she watches the prince lean closer to kiss her. He then begs her not to leave him, so she promises to do her best to stay with him. Juana is quite smug that she got to spend the night in the prince's chamber, even though nothing really happened. They had just slept through their aching muscles and exhaustion from the night's events. Currently, Juana is getting ready in the bathroom while an impatient Vincent is nagging her to hurry up. She quickly opens the door and he begins complaining that he was made to wait for her since early morning, even though it's his birthday. He then insists that in order for her to make it up to him, she will have to close her eyes. Despite how incredulous she is, she obeys him. Suddenly, she feels the prince kiss her on the lips. When she opens her eyes, she witnesses his smiling face, claiming that it was the perfect birthday morning. You sneaky prince, you're capable of being romantic after all. Soon, they find themselves at the emergency meeting the Emperor has called for. There's a growing concern about the recent attacks caused by witches. Everyone is so suspicious that they don't even want Juana, the prince's personal guard, to be present in the meeting. The prince quickly defends her, reminding them that Juana has triumphed against witches 2 times. Still, the Emperor is far too suspicious, and the prince's efforts are in vain. When Juana tries to defend herself, the other nobles interrupt her, wanting to drown out her words. Let her speak! Honestly, these nasty people are so close-minded! The prince once again maneuvers the situation in his favor. He points out the presence of the King of Gordon, the father of Vivian. The king wants to bring his daughter home, pleading that he'll never let her leave the palace. Vincent then implies that if the king lends his troops to the other kingdoms, then they'd probably let him take his only daughter home. He is indeed ruthless, using a poor father's grief to his benefit. After some gaslighting from the prince, the king reluctantly agrees. The emperor then declares that Duke Owen would personally escort her home once the war is over. When everyone leaves, the emperor then tells his son that Juana's knighthood ordination must be kept secret. Knighting a woman is against custom, so they mustn't allow anyone to find out. When it's finally just the two of them, Juana and Vincent joke around for a bit before they hold hands and leave to get ready for the ball. Meanwhile, far away from the comfort of the palace, a girl is crying, wishing for everyone's demise. Helen comes to visit Zinnia, who is now known as Jenny. The newly appointed princess is crying her eyes out. Helen tries to comfort her, and the girl shares how worried she is about the dangers that come from being a princess, especially after Lilith took advantage of her using her magic. She doesn't want to continue being a princess. But Helen tells her that she doesn't have a choice. She assures the poor girl that they will be together if she trusts her. She swears that they will protect this life. Soon the birthday celebration for Prince Vincent begins. After welcoming everyone, the Emperor then announces that he will reward Helen for protecting Vincent and saving Princess Jenny. He bestows upon her the Golden Castle, the late Queen's Castle. Everyone cheers as Helen bows to thank the Emperor. This doesn't sit well with me at all, since it was Juana who risked her life trying to guard the orb. Later on, Juana watches as Vincent and Helen dance together, and she'll be lying if she says she isn't envious. But when she sees that a bunch of noblemen are attempting to talk to Helen, Juana instantly becomes protective and drives the men away. With a gleeful smile, she asks Helen to dance with her instead. As they move their bodies to the music, Helen tells her that anyone who likes her will end up acting like a fool. Juana's amusement is then replaced with a shock when Helen mentions the prince. Juana expresses her confusion, asking her what she means. So Helen recalls how the prince was looking at Juana after Lilith's attack. His feelings were shining in his eyes. The way he was looking at her is how someone looks at someone important to them. With conviction, Juana tells her that she is sorry that she likes the prince too, but she will not give up even though their statuses are different. Instead of being angry, Helen gives her a warm smile, saying that she's acting like the Juana she knows. She then says that everyone wants to marry the prince, but Juana actually has a chance. But then Helen holds her hand and asks her for something. She wants her to slow down a bit. As long as the prince is not married, she can stay with him. All of them can remain best friends for a while. All she asks is that Juana give her another year to dream. Juana replies that she wants to have some time to think about it. Later on, the prince surprises Juana with her ordination in the garden. Even though it's just the two of them, the atmosphere is solemn and electrifying. Vincent asks Juana to kneel and receive her knighthood. After it's done, Vincent is now sure that he will get Juana's loyalty and love. Juana has finally become his knight. The ball is still in full swing when it's interrupted by a girl who declares that everyone's happiness is fake. Her once elegant dress is now rag-like with various patches all over. She threatens to throw herself from the balcony and make everyone disappear. Everyone is panicking at this point, and Vincent orders that, witch or not, they must capture the troublemaker no matter what. All the while, the girl despairs that even in this world, everything is the same. No one understands her. No one is listening to her. Juana finally finds her voice and assures the girl that she'll listen and help her find happiness. But the girl does not want to listen to an NPC, non-player character. She does not want to suffer any longer, so she might as well meet her end then and there. Juana then realizes that the girl is Cinderella, and the girl is determined to give up. She jumps and is about to fall if not for the prince sneaking behind and getting a hold of her. The two fall together, and thankfully, the guards are able to gather pillows to cushion the fall. The girl is instantly flustered once she is face to face with the charming prince. Soon, Juana is tasked to escort the girl somewhere safe. She makes sure that she's settled in the room and is about to take her leave when the girl asks her if she can see the prince. She then shyly confesses that she thinks she likes him already. Gosh, that was fast! Later on, as Juana is walking the dark corridor, she happens to meet Duke Owen. The two of them step outside and settle on the balcony. He hands her a piece of candy, and they joke around for a bit. But then the atmosphere becomes more serious when she questions why he is treating her so nicely. After all, she's just an ordinary person who is lucky enough to rise up in rank as a knight. She tells him all about her insecurities and how tired she currently is. But to her surprise, the Duke comes closer to adjust her cape and assures her that she is good enough. He describes her as someone who's brave and encourages her to believe in herself. He then messes her hair fondly, and she is thankful that he is there to comfort her. Aw, their relationship is so wholesome. The Duke sure does care for her a lot. Owen then invites her to go on a trip with him. He's supposed to bring Vivian back to her kingdom, and she wants her to join his team. Juana is ecstatic to hear the offer, wanting to finally explore. But then she remembers that the prince would probably not approve. Owen tells her that she still has a month to think about it. When she returns to her room, she finds the prince waiting for her. He impatiently asks her what she found out from the new girl. Hearing his suspicion about the girl enrages her, so she draws her sword and pins him to the bed. Instead of fearing her, he comments that she dares to use the sword he has given her as a threat to him. He even seems to be enjoying their rather awkward position. We see through you, Your Highness. He then teases her for acting jealous, and when she tries to retort, he kisses her. She is so shocked that she quickly moves away. However, the prince tasted traces of apple candy from her, and he instantly looked murderous. He knew that she was with Owen. The prince sharply questions how his uncle knows her. Duke Owen is someone known to avoid getting dragged into politics and even into war for that matter, even though he is known for his many victories against witches. He asks why a wise man like his uncle would approach her. Irritated, Juana answers that perhaps it was her who approached him because she was sick of his cheating ways. The prince argues that they've only been together for a few days, but she retorts that he still let another girl fall into his lap. She certainly has a point. But then she is shocked when he suggests that she marry Owen, detailing that if she allows him to die without an heir, then she would be the most powerful widow in the empire. In time, he will marry her. What an outrageous plan! Poor Owen. Juana is so annoyed by his suggestion that she tries to slap him, but he catches her hand. He then drags the two of them to bed, hugging her tight as he rambles on. He asks her to make herself more valuable so that others won't be outraged that he is betting on her. Later on, Cinderella's stepmom and stepsisters arrive to accuse the girl of all sorts of things. They're Viscount Fate's wife and heirs, and they think that they are important enough to harass Cinderella in the palace. Of course, Juana won't let this continue, so she interrupts and sends him away for interrogation. Cinderella is so thankful for her, saying that even though she is an NPC, she wants them to be sisters. She is so naive somehow. Currently, Cinderella is begging Juana to believe her. Her so-called family is just making up lies. She has never stolen anything from them. She even recklessly mentions that the dress she was wearing the day she arrived in the palace was caused by transformation magic. Juana quickly shushes her, not wanting anyone to overhear their conversation. Turns out, a fairy gave Cinderella a pair of magic slippers that can make whatever clothes she is wearing into a princess dress as long as she keeps it on, but only before midnight. Juana warns her to keep this a secret because the people are paranoid about witches and having such a magical thing is dangerous. Soon, it was revealed that Cinderella is also a princess, the daughter of King of Pelosia's long-lost sister. The emperor has declared that she too will be a princess candidate. Later on, Juana is having tea with Owen, and she expresses her worry for Cinderella since she's a bit naive and the palace is a dangerous place. Once again, the Duke convinces her to go on the tour with him, and even the Duke's closest aide, in his most threatening manner, comments that joining the trip will be good for her career. After some consideration, Juana agrees, and the two men reveal a cake they prepared to congratulate her for becoming a knight. Juana stares fondly at the cake, and she feels as if she's a relative again. Cinderella is amazed that she is actually a princess. She truly believes that she is the main character, and the prince is her male lead. She also sees the other princess candidates as the villains in her story. She is obviously still a child. She is so frustrated that she can't keep the prince's attention solely on her, so she gives a toast to everyone, saying that she wants to get along with them. But when Jenny refuses to drink, she makes her feel guilty, so the poor girl ends up drinking the wine. But then Jenny collapses to the ground in pain. It is revealed that Lilith has been feeding her a drug called Blood Essence Butterfly that causes her body to weaken, and alcohol triggers a horrible reaction. The prince assures Jenny that he will punish Cinderella, but he also orders Helen to teach the girl the ways of the palace. But then, when it's just Helen and Jenny in the room, it is revealed that the two of them planned this so the prince would choose Helen to be his princess. Jenny believes that Helen is her only lifeline. OMG, Helen is becoming darker! The next day, Cinderella has to go meet Helen for her lesson. She is afraid to go and even clings to Juana. She asks her to protect her if Helen harms her. Of course, Juana is quick to defend her friend, saying that Helen is the most gentle person she knows. Unfortunately for her, Cinderella is forced to read all day. Meanwhile, Helen and Juana are having a chat. Helen tells her that when she said that she wanted to keep the peace in the palace, she really meant what she said. Juana stares at her for a while and she finally comes to a decision. She wants to live with Helen until the last day, so she agrees to her earlier proposal. They will take things slow. Why do I feel like she's making a mistake? 1 month later, the situation with the witches is becoming even more dire, and the prince is currently overworking himself. Juana asks him to rest, but he insists that she would have to sleep with him. However, when Juana refuses to do the work, he jokes that she's boring. Look at him having time to joke around like he wasn't a tsundere a few chapters ago. Moments later, Owen arrives to give them exciting news. The kingdom of Pelosia has won a battle. Vincent is overjoyed, but his happiness is dampened when he suddenly feels dizzy. Juana is instantly by his side, but the prince pays her no mind. Instead, he wraps his arm around her and tells his uncle that he doesn't feel very comfortable letting Juana go with him during his trip to Gordon. He then smugly leads Juana away, even though she obviously doesn't agree with him. Left alone, Owen concludes that Vincent is becoming complacent. So guys, what do you think of this story so far? Please subscribe and turn on notifications for updates on this and all our other stories, so you can be the first to find out when they're out. Thank you so much for your support. See you in the next one!